Uno, dos, tres. Tamarindo. Closing 1 minute recap, key takeaways. Wait, this is not for next week on Tuesday, no? You have another one. So I'm good for Tuesday. I'm gonna make one for Monday later, and then I'll need to make one for Wednesday. I try to get every day of the week. I'm debating at some point, because I feel like the shorts are working. The sweet spot's like 7 to 10, but less is also good. So it's almost like the bigger videos don't matter. You just have, even if I put one a week, it would be fine. It's just that the little ones feed my shorts. So, and I liked doing them, and they can't hurt. So it's just, all right, I'll put it and put it on TikTok and stuff. Honestly, it's because I like it. If I didn't like it, I would have quit a long time ago. Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching and listening. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. Really means a lot to me. This topic is actually inspired by SOS Save Our Sites conference. We're going to have a panel on scaling your site 10x. So what does that mean? That means going from 100,000 yearly revenue to $1 million in yearly revenue, or it may mean going from 500,000 yearly revenue to 5 million yearly revenue, or it might be going from 1 million yearly revenue to 10 million. It doesn't matter. 10x is 10x, and there's various ways you can do it. There's probably, I'm going to break this video down into roughly 6 segments. So there's probably something in here you're already doing, depending on what stage you're at in the revenue cycle. If you're just starting out, obviously you're not doing much. But if you're already at 1 million but want to get to 10, which is actually exactly like my site, Yuma Clinical Trials, there's definitely things you can do here. And I'm going to kind of interweave what I've done with my site over the last few years, because I know this topic's super interesting to a lot of the site owners. This podcast may not get a lot of views, but it'll get like super important views. And I think we can generate a good amount of outcomes for people watching. And it's a nice little preview for our SOS panel. But it starts with your mind. So regardless of where you are, it starts with your mind. The reason why most sites stay small or plateau is because of mindset. And that's fine. Like there's no issue with staying small or plateauing if that's your goal. Like if you want this to just be a lifestyle business, or you want something stable year over year. I know a lot of doctors that own their own research sites and have it as kind of side income, and they don't really want to they don't want a 10x, right? They're happy. Hey, I make an extra $250,000 a year. I pay 2 coordinators. We do like 4 studies a year, and we're moderate enrollers, and we only do the studies that we want. I have nothing but respect for these type of clinics. I don't think they should 10x unless they want to. And it all boils down to the will of the owners and the leadership. But if you are watching this, you didn't click it because you're not interested. You're at least curious in how to do it. And I'm an entrepreneur, so for me, I do like to scale and grow. I do think at some point you reach a limit and you start looking for other things, right? Start looking for maybe different verticals within your space. So you see this a lot with the sites that merge into site networks. And now as the site networks in 2025 are getting bigger, the site networks are starting to overlap into what the CROs traditionally do, which is monitoring. And we talked a little bit about this in our last video, Clinical Research Beyond the Basics. But I think for the majority of people watching, growth is important to you. And it starts with your mindset, and it starts with eliminating your scarcity mindset. And I don't care if you're in a super competitive market, obviously it's going to be harder. Or if you're in a not so competitive market like Yuma, there's going to be different challenges associated with any setup, any community, any level of competition. But the good thing in the bigger cities is you have more access to specialists. And this is a huge part of wanting to expand. So if you are a site and you only have one PI, again, like I said, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want and you're happy with it. But I would never want to depend on just one PI. That PI can get hit by a bus tomorrow. God forbid, but it happens. Doctors also lead very stressful lives. The lifespan of a doctor is shorter than a non-physician because they have a lot of stress. It's ironic. They're the ones that know the most about healthcare, and yet their own lifespans are shorter. So that should tell you that you can't take anything for granted. So if you have only one PI, you're vulnerable. And you need to have multiple investigators working with you and multiple investigators that you're always grooming and that you are always creating their talent and developing their talent, like similar to baseball teams when they have a farm system. You have a minor leagues, you have a major leagues. Well, in research, the minor league equivalent of a PI is a sub-investigator. And this is how they get research experience on their CV. And so the first thing you got to do, probably the first thing most people can do, and it's probably the easiest thing to do, is to start doing studies outside of your immediate vertical. So when I started here in Yuma Clinical Trials, last year we grossed close to $1 million, just shy of $1 million. For argument's sake, we did $1 million in revenue. The year before that, we did about $500K. And the year before that was really our first year in business. We did $250K. So we basically doubled every year. We didn't 10x every year, but we doubled every year. To get from that first year of $250K to 10x from that would be $2.5 million. So which would almost be, if we double again this year, we'd be at $2 million. And we're within arm's reach of 10xing in about 5 years, which is good. I don't even think that's fast. I think that's a very achievable speed. Our staff, you can go talk to them. They're not overwhelmed. They have flexible schedules. I think if you really wanted to pour gasoline on it, you could do it quicker. I'm not interested in doing it quickly. I'm interested in doing it sustainably. And so what we've been doing, we've expanded beyond our internal medicine doctor. The very next specialist we got was a dermatologist. And we started the same way. Let's put you as a sub-I for a few studies. That way, when we have a study that's appropriate for you, you already have experience. Then we started getting studies for the dermatologist. A year later, we got hooked up with a psychiatrist/neurologist. He's actually dual certified. We started getting studies for him. Same process. Late last year, we got introduced to a pulmonologist and sleep specialist. Same person. We've got him his first 3 studies. We have yet to make revenue from him. So that $1 million in revenue in 2024 was all from the internal medicine doc, the psychiatrist, and the dermatologist. And very little from the dermatologist, really. So it was like 2.5 PIs that got us to $1 million, whereas the year before, it was really like 1.5 that got us to $500K. And the year before that, it was only one PI that got us to $250K. So we've been creating the infrastructure, and I think that's the first thing a lot of sites should do. And yes, it's hard. You want to celebrate when you get one PI. Say, yes, this guy or gal agreed to do this with me. But you should, if you want in a growth mindset, you should be looking for adding more. And since then, we have a cardiologist who we have yet to get a study for. We are hopefully knock on wood, going to get him his first study. And then in the pipeline, we have a nephrologist that we don't have any studies for yet. And we have another internal medicine specialist, which we could expand 30 miles south of here into another town called San Luis, Arizona, where we can do studies for the internal medicine there. So we have the infrastructure to support probably 5 million gross revenue. Maybe we could push it to 7 to 10 if we get the right studies, which is part of this as well. So if you've already expanded with different PIs, don't worry, there's more strategies too. But I know 80% of you, myself included, we could still use an oncologist right now. And there's a couple of oncology opportunities we have in Yuma and the surrounding area that we haven't approached. We can use a gastroenterologist. We could use a pediatrician. If we landed all those and got 1 or 2 studies for each, you can seriously start considering 7 million year revenue to 10. And you have to continue to build your infrastructure out. So like I mentioned with my staff, we're always slightly overhired to the point where it's not affecting really the profit margins. We should run the profit margins at around 60% prior to owners getting paid, but that includes PIs getting paid. So if you include PIs getting paid and staff and net rent and everything, your profit margin's about 60%. So hiring another coordinator doesn't really dip into your profit margin, especially if you hire them entry level. You have a pretty affordable person that you can grow into a full-time coordinator. And our full-time coordinators and that are experienced, they get paid well for Yuma standards, like really well. And actually, even for national standards, they get paid well. I've talked to colleagues of mine, and they're surprised at how much we're paying them. But it's cheaper to actually find good people, train them well, and pay them slightly north of fair than it is to nickel and dime and keep losing coordinators to other jobs. And you're not just competing with other research clinics, you're competing actually with other industries. So if you get a medical assistant and you're not paying them well, and they go to school and become a nurse, they're not going to stay around with you, and they don't care if it's research. They're going to go work for the hospital. So you got to figure out ways to develop your coordinators as well, so that as you're growing out your study capabilities, you're not overburdening your existing staff. And I think the metric for keeping a coordinator balanced as far as work is about 4 to 6 studies a coordinator, where it's their own responsibility. Now, we currently have 3 for each, which 3 is, we can give 2 to 3 more to each one. And I don't think we would be maxed out on their output potential. But before we get to that, we would, of course, hire someone else. Our next hire would be an administrator, where they will essentially do pre-screening for patients, and they will essentially be taking care of data entry and just the mundane things like getting dry ice and getting cash for visits. So with only the whole point of this is with just a little more investment, not a lot. If you have the right infrastructure, you don't actually, in order to 10x your revenue, you don't actually have to put in the same amount of expenses at the same rate. So to 10x your revenue does not require a 10x investment in more staff. That's 1-to-1. It doesn't work that way. The benefit of business, if you build the right system and you scale it, is you get 10x return for maybe 1.5x more investment. And of course, your investments are going to go up. But if your revenues go up, your profit margin should still be around 60. And when you get bigger, you do get less efficient at a certain point. It should never dip below 50%. So I know 90% of sites watching, myself included, didn't max out the amount of providers they can get studies with. Now, the thing with these providers, you got to get them studies here and there, at least one study a year, or they're going to lose interest. So I'm in risk of with my cardiologist. I've been working with him for a year, and by working, I mean trying to get him studies. And for some reason, cardiology has been in a bit of a slow growth, I guess, or at least we're not getting the studies. So I'm literally trying to get him any study that he wants to do, that he's okay with, just to start doing research with him as a PI. And we may have found one recently that's a really tough study, and those are the ones you're going to get early on. So but those, if you negotiate the budgets well, and this is where me and Chris's services come in with DSCS. If you need help negotiating your budgets and getting you more studies and negotiating higher budgets for you for a low monthly price, we do all that for you. Just message me. You can send me a text 949-415-6256, and that is my telephone number. You got to keep the PIs busy. So it's not just enough to get a verbal commitment. And people ask me, well, what do you do as far as agreements with the PIs? Talk to your attorneys. I've never had any agreement other than either an LLC that I partner with the PIs on, and I've made a video just on this, how to find and partner and compensate principal investigators, so you can find that on my channel. Don't waste your time with all that. Just, they got to trust you. You got to trust them. An independent contractor agreement's enough. You don't need, and I don't even have that, honestly, with most of these guys. I have LLC agreements if I become a partner with them, or an independent contractor agreement. Don't try to lock them in. Just get them a study and start making revenue for them. That's what they want at the end of the day. They want options for their patients, and they want more revenue. So you got to keep the PIs busy. And that's the part where you got to start doing business development. Now, we talked a little bit about profitability versus revenue. With that being said, not all studies are worth taking. Some studies, you may think, oh, okay, we got a new study. Unless you have nothing for this PI and you just want to keep them active, you should not be taking on just whatever study comes your way. We've been turning down a lot of studies because we know what we're good at least with a few of our PIs. We don't know what we're good at with our other PIs that we haven't done studies with, because we haven't done studies with them yet. But once you figure out what you're good at, the PIs that start getting more experience start getting more studies offered to them. And you don't want to say yes to all of them, because now your coordinators are overworked, they're potentially stretched thin, and you're not doing anything but screen failing people. And you're not going to 10x your revenue with a bunch of screen fails, or even worse, 10x your revenue just from study startup. That's not a business model to just get as many studies as you can and then milk the study startup funding. That's not, if you realistically don't think you can enroll, my rule is 3 patients that I can randomize in a study. If I don't think I can randomize 3 patients in a study that's paying me anywhere from $20,000 to $60,000 a completed patient, I'm not taking that study, because it's a waste of money. If I can't bring in at least 6 figures on a study, it's not worth doing. And so we move on, unless you don't have any studies for that PI. Then you do, and then if you figure out, hey, we could actually enroll in this study, now you double down on that study and bring in more support staff. This is why you have to have that farm system in place. This is why you always have to be, in my opinion, slightly overhired. Slightly. So that when you have that surprise of like, hey, we actually can do really well on these couple of studies, you go all in on those studies. And that's what's coming next, is strategically enrolling well and being a high enroller on certain studies. You don't want to be a high enroller on every study unless you can actually do it well. But you don't want to go out of your way to try to figure it out. If something's already working in one or two studies, go crazy on those studies. Put the other staff to do the other things. So when I have a study that's going really well, and I just told you I have coordinators that do 3 to 6 studies each. If I just found a study where we're doing extremely well and we can make $400K off of this study or even $500,000 off of this study, I don't want that coordinator doing anything else. So at that point, I have a meeting with the staff and say, this coordinator is just doing this study. This is her backup. Everyone else we got to distribute right now. When the enrollment's over for this, we'll go back to how things were. But for right now, we got to go all in. And matter of fact, sometimes I'll even put more coordinators on that study and then bring in other people, other support staff to manage the lesser enrolling studies. Now, if you figure out a way to have multiple high enrolling studies, that's another way to 10x your revenue. So the really good studies, at least in my anecdotal experience, and we have yet to do an overnight study. We have yet to do a vaccine study. I'm going to get into those pretty soon. Although vaccines, you can debate what's going to happen now with the new administration with RFK and the Make America Healthy Again movement. I haven't done a vaccine study at Yuma Clinical Trials yet. I can 10x in 5 years, like I outlined at the beginning of this video, without doing vaccine studies. And private equity firms don't necessarily treat vaccine revenue the same as the other indications. And I've written an article on this on LinkedIn. Not all revenue is created equally. We can go into depth on that later on a later podcast if we want. But figure out ways to be a high enroller on at least 1 or 2 or 3 or however many studies. 10 to 20% of your studies, you should probably be a high enroller. Maybe not the high enroller where you're an outlier and you're going to attract FDA audits, but top 10% of sites on those studies. And you double down on those studies when you find them. When you struck oil, you got to double down on that. For us, it's been the obesity stuff. It's been the GLP-1 agonists. We're getting another one, God willing, by the spring. I already know we're doubling down on that. That's our area of expertise right now. I know in the past we've done well on osteoarthritis of the knee. We don't have any right now. If we were to get one, I know we would double down on that. The jury's still out on how we're doing as far as respiratory. We have a lot of potential, but we haven't actually proven anything yet. So I'm somewhat skeptical on our potential, but I think we can eventually be high enroller on that too. And the jury's still out on our psychiatry, bipolar, depression. I think we can do well too in those cases. So we have certain verticals, certain therapeutic area verticals that we can do really well, that we know when a study comes around, there's no debate about do we take this study or not. This is a study in our wheelhouse that we can basically 10x our revenue if we just get a few more of these kind of studies. So figure out what studies are appropriate for you for your more experienced PIs, but for your newer ones, obviously just to get them going, take on a study even if it's harder, randomize 2 or 3 people, and you'll be okay. You'll be getting experience. You'll know if the PI is actually good to fulfill his end or her end of the bargain. So getting more studies, we've kind of discussed that. Leverage your LinkedIn and your network to land high-value studies. Things like Inato. Shout out to Inato. They're a sponsor of this podcast. Once you get some experience for your PIs, Inato is a great place to go and find more studies. Inato's been helpful for us for a few trials. I don't think any of our high enrolling studies came from Inato, but we have gotten studies through Inato that have been helpful for sure. Like I think in the last year we got like 4 or 5 studies through Inato, but our high enrolling ones came from, and this is where I think also 90% of sites need to figure out, are medical science liaisons. So every doctor has a private practice, and we don't even do a very good job of this. We do a decent job. I would say actually below decent, and we've still had success. Every private practice physician, so whether it's your internal medicine doc, your respiratory, your psychiatrist, your cardiologist, have sales reps coming to them. If they're prescribers, they're being visited by sales reps. Your job is to talk to those sales reps. They're not going to be able to talk to you about research, but introduce yourself and say, I would like to meet the medical science liaison in our territory to discuss doing studies because Dr. So-and-so is interested in doing studies. What you're doing is planting seeds, but I'm telling you, our biggest earning studies have come because of these discussions. The study that we've been enrolling now for over a year, I think 2 years. We're close to 2 years that we've been enrolling. Enrolling just ended, but it's a long-term study, so we still have patient visits. By the time that study's over, in about 3 years, we would have earned $500,000 just on this study. And that was done by planting seeds with the medical science liaison a year before we ever got the study. And so it doesn't seem like you're doing much, but if you do it enough, you will 10x just off of that. And those are the relationships you want because they come directly from the sponsors. Not that the CROs are not good, but the relationships from the sponsors are much better. So we've discussed multi-therapeutic expansion. Do everything you can to do that. Now, there's another aspect, overnight and long stay studies. These are extremely profitable, and I don't necessarily mean healthy volunteer. Like there is healthy volunteer / whatever indication the sponsor's looking at, where it's like a hybrid healthy volunteer, also first in human, first in study participant. I've seen a lot of those lately. There's sites that do only phase 1, first in human, healthy volunteers. Those, you just need one of those studies, and you can make like $2 million revenue just off of that. It is more work, so you do need more support staff. It is 24/7. You need medical coverage. I do not recommend getting started with that, but I do recommend once you get the ball rolling and you have the right facility for it, you can start considering doing some overnight studies. Now, one of our PIs, the respiratory specialist I was telling you about, he's also board certified in sleep medicine. He owns a sleep lab in his practice. So we already have the infrastructure in place for an overnight study, for a simple one. Not anything crazy, but a simple overnight study where we can put 3 to 5 patients at a time and monitor them throughout the evening and 24/7. There are these kind of studies where instead of like a 30-day overnight, there's like a 3-day overnight. And if you negotiate those budgets well, you make really good money on the inpatient portion, and then it becomes then an outpatient study. We have 2 of these studies in the pipeline right now, one for our respiratory specialist and one with our dermatologist. And those came from my networking outreaches with medical science liaisons, one of them. And the other one came from DSCS's study lead services, which are included in negotiating budgets and all that stuff. So I have my lead CRC, Katie, reach out to potential new studies. And this was one that we found, and it's a phase 1. So it's overnight plus becomes outpatient. You just need to make sure you have the right facility, equipment, staff, SOPs. You're going to have to revise SOPs and things like that. There's a lot of return on investment for this overnight capability, but if you find the right situation, whether it's somebody that you know that owns an assisted living facility, somebody that you know that says, yeah, you could use our nursing home or at least a few rooms from our nursing home. I've done both in the past, and those are 7-figure studies right there. So if you're at 100K and you do one of these studies, you just 10x'd it in a year. Now, a lot of things have to go right for you. I think you can grow into this because you do need a good support staff. But in year 3, 4, 5 of your clinic, you can do this. Now, I've discussed vaccines. You can make a lot of money on vaccine studies. Time will tell if this will continue to be the case with the new administration. At the time of this video, actually today, they're deciding if they're going to put RFK in charge of Health and Human Services. Whether he does or whether he doesn't, politics go into play here, because after COVID, there's been a lot of skepticism around vaccines. There's two schools of thought here. Either we're going to do more vaccine studies because we need more safety data, or we're going to do less because sponsors are going to shift from that to other chronic diseases. I haven't done a vaccine study here in Yuma, but you can enroll like crazy when you do have them. They're still out. One of our studies actually is a vaccine. And this is also part of the overnight study that I was discussing. I don't think we're going to go crazy enrolling in that one, but in the like flu vaccines or influenza or RSV or whatever the new pandemic might be, there's always vaccine study opportunities. And in these studies, you can enroll, like in a regular study for obesity, you can be a high enroller and randomize 15 patients in like a year. You're like in the top 15% of sites. In a vaccine study, you're talking about 200, 300. And I have colleagues of mine, they do nothing but vaccine studies. I don't know how they're going to pivot now if the climate changes. But they've done nothing but vaccine studies, and they make multiple 7 figures a year. Now, this revenue is discounted because these are different studies. You kind of go all in on these studies. You're kind of risking it all too, because if you're only doing 1 or 2 vaccine studies and then the sponsor pulls the plug, or the FDA audits you and says, no, put a screening hold on this site, or the sponsor doesn't pay for some reason. I know there was a recent example of a sponsor that went bankrupt that didn't pay for their COVID study. I mean, it leaves sites out to dry. And so I've never gotten into vaccines because of a number of reasons, but it is a way to help you 10x your revenue. Finally, the important part that we've kind of discussed is sustaining this growth and avoiding burnout. So if you sustain this growth, that's the most important part, right? As long as your clinic is in the growth phase, you don't have to double every year. It's actually kind of hard to keep doing that once you get to a certain size. I think we could double our revenue again this year, even though we're off to kind of a slow start because it's been hard in this first month to get people randomized. But we do have enough studies coming up soon, and one in particular that I know we're going to be high enroller that should start in the spring, that could theoretically help us 2x our revenue from last year, which would put us at $2 million, which would put us almost at 10x from 4 or 5 years ago. So I think within 4 to 5 years, like I said, you could 10x your site. Especially, it's a lot easier if you started from nothing to 10x. The hardest part for the new site owners is getting to that $1 million range, because going from 100K to $1 million in revenue is actually not that hard. With 100K, you probably just did 1 study. To get to $1 million, you can do that off of 3 or 4 studies. But it's hard to get to that point because most doctors give up research after that first study. Well, we only made this much this year. It's not worth it. I don't want to overhire. You kind of have to overhire and invest in your infrastructure a little bit. I think it's harder to get to 1 million from 0 than it is to get to 10 million from 1 million. Because something magical happens around that 1 million revenue mark. The site matures, the site develops its infrastructure, the site refines its SOPs, the staff are getting better. As long as you're not burning them out and treating them well, the staff is also exponentially growing as far as their knowledge and capabilities. And then your PIs are happy seeing that, hey, I don't actually have to work that much and I'm getting a decent amount of passive income, even though safety oversight's not passive, but compared to their private practice, research is truly a blessing. So it's harder to get to 1 million from 0 than it is to get to 10 million from 1. And that's basically how you 10x your site's revenue. You can do it quicker. The thing is to sustain it. Because if you 10x your revenue in 1 year because you brought on a bunch of vaccine studies, but then the next year the vaccine studies dry out, you're not going to be able to sustain that. Also, people get excited when they find one PI and they find one therapeutic area that they're very good at, like depression. And what happens when depression studies dry out? You don't have any other PIs. I thank God that we had a psychiatrist last year, and I thank God that we have a respiratory therapist this year, because my internal medicine, who generated all that revenue the previous year, those studies, the enrollment ended. The revenue is still coming through on the existing visits, but the enrollment ended. And if it wasn't for us having a psychiatrist and a respiratory therapist keeping us busy throughout the second half of last year, we would not be in striking distance of doubling our revenue again. But because of them and our capabilities to at least screen and randomize a few, we have a fighter's chance. And ultimately, that's what you want, is sustainability and being able to do this year after year after year. And I don't see the growth slowing down for my site in Yuma. We can expand, like I said, 30 minutes away with another internal medicine doc. We can expand into other therapeutic areas. We still have yet to maximize all of our PIs. We've just kind of scratched the surface for a few of them. We figured out what they're good at. We could double down on that, but we can also figure out new things maybe for them. And then with the more specialists you have, the more options you have for what studies you bring on, etc. Hopefully this podcast video helped. Let me know what you think. I hope to see you at SOS, saveoursites.com. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Let me know what you think. Bye-bye. Hey, if you guys like that kind of content, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. Stay tuned for more videos.